Hey there, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
we don't want to put our officers through training. We want our officers to be trained.
We sit down with Chicago's newly appointed police superintendent, just 3 weeks on the job. It's been 60 years since residents boycotted Chicago Public Schools' segregationist policies. A look at the impact years later and how the fight continues today. And a new production sings the life and music of jazz legend Louis Armstrong. And we kick things off with Chicago's new police chief next.
Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
The city's new police superintendent has been on the job for exactly 21 days, and he says so far, the honeymoon's not over. Larry Snelling came to the job from the agency's Counterterrorism Bureau and is the first superintendent hired by the Community Commission for Public Safety, or Police Safety and Accountability. Mayor Brandon Johnson touted Snelling's Inglewood roots during the selection and confirmation process, so I started by asking him how that foundation sets him up to do his new job.
Having an understanding of the neighborhood, having an understanding of the people in the neighborhood. You know, outside of some of these communities, people would think that the majority of the people living in these communities are, you know, actively engaging in criminal activity, when that's not true at all. That's actually a smaller percentage of the people who live in these communities, and they're great people living within these communities, tax-paying citizens who just want peace in their neighborhood. So having an understanding of that gives me a different perspective and a better outlook on building relationships within these communities.
You're the first superintendent to be hired under this new process through the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability. How do you plan on working with them, considering they now have some of the authority that used to be yours and the mayor's?
Well, I'll tell you, I have a really good working relationship with the commission. They're very active with understanding our policies, with understanding police work, and the one thing that I can't say enough about them is that they're willing to listen. Again, they're listening to the challenges that we face, and they didn't walk in and start demanding things. They knew what they didn't know, and those things that they don't, they ask questions about, which again, I really appreciate. And we've had conversations. Ultimately, decisions on what we do have to be from within, because as someone who's been doing this for years, I have a clear understanding of what's necessary to fight violent crime. But obviously we have to do it constitutionally, and there's nothing wrong with having a level of oversight and input from someone outside of CPD. So I think the working relationship is good.
So a 39-page report from the Independent Monitor about the consent decree found that police officers have been abusing their authority to stop and search Chicagoans for some years. Of course, that further sows the distrust between the police department and the community that we hear so much about. How do you plan on earning community trust?
We need to look at that, learn from those things, find out what best practices are, and then understand our communities, understanding what's going on in our communities. Our officers have to get the best possible training. Now, again, the message on how that's done comes from the top. So when we look at incidents where we believe that There have been civil rights violations on the part of the police, things of that nature. We have to look at what message we're sending our officers at this time. Our officers have to have a clear understanding that when we make stops, they're based on reasonable suspicion or probable cause. And we have to reinforce that. We have to have our supervisors trained to make sure our officers are doing those things. And there has to be a level of accountability all the way up the chain. However, I believe that when our officers are giving the appropriate training, the appropriate direction, they will police constitutionally. It's always about the message that's coming from the top.
Also on the consent decree, the police department is only 5% fully compliant with those regulations. What's the cost to Chicagoans that the department is still so far behind?
The narrative is that the Chicago Police Department is behind on the consent decree. Now, what we're looking at is overall compliance numbers, but there are 3 levels of compliance until you get to that. The first one is policy. Creating and developing a policy according to what's in place and the way that that policy is developed, and everyone who gets the opportunity to have some input in that policy could take up to a year. Once that happens, now we have to get every member trained on that policy. And you're looking at a department with 14,000 members, that takes a while. So only then can you get to the full compliance once we've finished those 2. So we've got a lot of paragraphs of the consent decree that we've been working on that's nearly complete. It's just not at that final compliance stage. So we're working diligently toward the consent decree. So my belief also is to not rush the consent decree, especially the training aspect of it, because we want to get it right. We don't want to just say that we're in compliance. We want our officers to actually be in compliance, where our officers are getting the best possible training. We don't want to put our officers through training. We want our officers to be trained. And there's a difference there. So just to say that we're in compliance, the question will be later, did we really affect change within the department? Did we do something to make our officers and our department better? Did we do anything within that consent decree that was going to help the community have a better understanding of our police officers, and then to help bridge the gap between our officers and the community?
$2 billion, that is your budget, or your proposed budget for the next fiscal year. That is no small amount. We talk a lot about how our resources are spent in this city, of course, and not being able to police our way out of violence and out of crime. $2 billion, still a lot. Give taxpayers a sense of what that's paying for.
As a police department that's trying to move into the new age of policing, not only is that going to take time, but it's going to take resources also. Technology, when we're looking at hiring, not only are we looking to hire more police officers, but we're looking to hire more non-sworn personnel to assist and help us to rebuild this department. We need to get up to speed with our non-sworn members within the department to help us with things like technology. People who come in with special skill sets, that's going to help us as a department. Now, once we get through what we're trying to do, because vehicles, everything that we need to police, it's costly. It's not, those things are not cheap. But once we start to move forward, and once we start to see the effectiveness of what we're doing, then maybe we can start to look at the budget to see what it is that we may be able to cut, if at all anything. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we will cut the budget over time, but we will consistently assess and reassess what we're doing.
You've mentioned technology a good bit and said that that is an important part of your crime fighting strategy, but the mayor has said that he is not a big proponent of ShotSpotter. Give us a sense of, what technology is most important in your crime fighting strategy and how that might be impacted if the mayor should cancel the ShotSpotter contract down the road.
Here's what I'll tell you. We have all sorts of technology. We have our strategic deployment rooms, which gives us a better visual of what's going on around the city. and we work within that room. When we talk about shot detection technology, I think it's important to understand one thing. I mean, I know it's been tagged as a tool of surveillance, which it isn't. It detects sounds of gunfire. And if we, as police officers, have the opportunity to get to a job immediately, even prior to a 911 call, it gives us the opportunity to get to that job and maybe apprehend someone who's shooting. But bigger than that, if there's someone who's been shot, it gives us the opportunity to render life-saving aid if we get there ahead of time. So that type of technology has been useful. It's been very useful. Obviously, the mayor is the mayor. I'm going to let the mayor make the decisions that the mayor makes, but we will and should have conversations about this.
And Snelling is set to defend the department's nearly $2 billion budget proposal before City Council next week. Up next, a look at the impact of the 1963 Chicago Public Schools boycott 60 years later. This Sunday marks 60 years to the day. Nearly 250,000 CPS students skipped school. It wasn't a skip day, though. It was a boycott. Students and their parents flooded the streets of Chicago in what's known as Freedom Day, a massive protest of the segregation in Chicago public schools and the superintendent at the time, Benjamin Willis. Joining us now to reflect on this historic demonstration and its impact 60 years later are Charles Smith, a former organizer and leader with the Congress of Racial Equality, known as CORE. He was a part of the 1963 CPS boycott. And Elizabeth Greer, co-founder and board member of Chicago United for Equity. She's also a board member of Raise Your Hand. Thanks to the two of you for joining us. Charles Smith, let's start with you, please. Take us back to 1963. Tell us about the trailers that were in the school parking lots known as Willis Wagons at the time.
At that time, I was about 22 years of age, and we, CORE, decided we needed to demonstrate against that whole issue called education in Chicago. Also, so we had a boycott at the Board of Education building on LaSalle, right at Clark Street, for about 4 to 5 days. We also knew that Ms. Rosie Simpson had asked us to participate on the south side of 71st and Low for the Willis Wagons, which were located next to railroad tracks or alleys. But the kids were supposed to have been bused to other schools because of that whole issue.
And the wagons, they existed because the district didn't want to integrate the schools. The black children were sent to the so-called wagons, while white children sat in school buildings that weren't always full.
And they were supposed to bus the kids to the other neighborhoods, but instead they created these wagons, or we call them wagons. So we also had two things going on. We were sitting in a sit-in at CPS, as well as had other groups outside. I was one of the, if you say, I was one of the sit-inners trapped at the, they wouldn't let us out, so we were locked in for almost a week. And that while the CORE members were also at 71st and Low.
A very tense time, it sounds like. A lot of tension.
I was 22, it wasn't tension to me. It was tension maybe to the school system, et cetera. I was a young person, so.
You were ready for the fight.
I've been ready for the fight ever since my mother dropped me out.
They can't stop you.
Right.
Freedom Day was October 22nd, 1963. You were getting there, Charles. How did that plan come together to make Freedom Day what it was? Because like you said, there were sit-ins and protests leading up to it.
Yes, but really, the so-called young groups, CORE, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, called SNCC, Black Panthers, all of us younger people were talking about it. The older leaders were kind of sitting back for a moment, but they all got involved in it. But Rosie was a catalyst. She went out and organized all the parents, all the kids, so that kids would participate throughout the whole system. And so it was a combination of different people making it happen. So, you know, we were one, other groups. You did not have breadbasket because that was Southern at that time with King. So, but you had community groups in Chicago that rallied behind that whole philosophy, and that's how it really occurred. Kids were held out. They did not go. And the reason we thought that was important, because you got paid by the head count. So if the kids did not go to school, it would penalize in the school system.
And I want to come back to that in a bit as well, because Elizabeth, you're a present-day education organizer and an advocate. What did you take from this movement? What did it teach you?
I mean, it's inspiring, and it taught me that boycotting and fighting against the system is possible. We were able to organize to save National Teachers Academy back in 2018, and it was largely a result of us building upon what had come before us in 1963. I've had the opportunity to speak with Rosie and get to know her, and she's an amazing person and an amazing organizer. And it was just so inspirational to know that since they did it way back then when it seemed really insurmountable, I mean, the situation was so oppressive in the 60s, that if they could do it, then we could do it as well in the 20th century.
You can really see the through line of organizing around education in Chicago from then to now. Charles, what was the immediate response in the aftermath like? You were just about to go into the financial penalty that hurt CPS as a result of that.
From what I gather, I can't speak to the whole educational aspect, but what really was the issues, I felt this issue of charter schools started to have a conversation. And it was starting to grow. It wasn't there at that point. But their emphasis was, whatever we learn, whatever we get out of this charter school philosophy, we would share with the public school system. I don't know if that ever happened. And what did they learn? What did they share with the public school? I think that's very important. I think nothing came out of it. And right now, my understanding is charter schools is a failure. People do not have to be certified teachers. You don't have to, certain young people that go into charter schools, if they do not measure up to whatever the rules and regs are, those are the black students, they drop them out.
Well, and there's certainly been, in Chicago, certainly been a lot of some controversy, some debate over the impact of charter schools. Some families certainly believe that they serve their families well. And we know at the time, Mr. Smith, CPS suffered a financial loss of $470,000 because, as you said, schools are paid by the student. And if the students aren't there, if that's almost $500,000 that the district didn't get. District also had to give a race count for the first time after that. And Elizabeth, we've continued to see the fight for racial equity and equality in CPS play out in other movements later. You mentioned the National Teachers Academy fight that you all had. Remind us what that was about and what you were fighting for.
Yeah, so back in about 2016, CPS, Ron was the mayor at the time and Janice Jackson was the CEO, put forth a proposal to close National Teachers Academy. We were a level 1+ elementary school at the time, and convert it into a high school to serve the much more well-to-do residents of the South Loop. And so we fought for our existence, and it seemed as though it was a fight that would be impossible to win because we were just one school. This came 5 years after the moratorium on closings from 2013. So CPS had sort of the right to close another school now since the moratorium had passed, and they set their eyes on NTA for this conversion. And we did fight it, and we were fortunate to be able to win our fight through the legal system. And so we filed a lawsuit and we won, and we're still open and thriving to this day.
And as we're discussing it, of course, we're seeing clips from two different documentaries. One is 63 Boycott, the other is We Are NTA. So again, another parallel here. Charles, we're almost out of time. I want to ask you, what are your hopes for this next generation, given all of the effort that folks like you and Elizabeth put in?
My hope is, just like me, my grandmother came during the Great Migration with her 16 kids, raised in one building. No one ever graduated from any college whatsoever. I'm the first graduate of college in my whole family.
You went on to become an architect.
Went on to become an architect and been called a militant from the moment I opened my mouth. I'm a militant. I'm just Charles Smith, African American gentleman that had been in Chicago for 80 years. I've seen it all, been through it. That's my impact. Hopefully, it will help other young people to go on, get their degrees, become whatever they want to be in life, and not let anything hold them back.
All right, advice from Charles Smith, the militant, Elizabeth Greer. Thanks to you both for joining us. And join us again on Monday, October 30th at noon for a Virtual Voices community conversation on this same topic. You will get to hear from someone that Charles Smith was mentioning. We'll be diving in much deeper on the 1963 CPS boycott, hearing from some other organizers and leaders at the time. To RSVP, you can visit WTTW.com/events. And we're back with more in just a moment, but first, a look at the weather. Black Theater United is an organization aimed at creating more diversity and inclusion in theater. With the help of that group, actress Vanessa Williams is making her debut as a producer for the Broadway production of A Wonderful World. It tells the story of jazz legend Louis Armstrong and stars James Monroe Iglehart. Arts correspondent Angel Ito sat down with the actor and producer and shares more about the production that's told from the perspective of his 4 wives.
So James, what has it been like working on this production with Vanessa?
I honestly love it. Vanessa has been fantastic, and I love the fact that she's brought her voice to it, and
friends.
and friends. They brought her friends too. I love that. But also, there's a moment of there's a moment of having a certain amount of power in what you do with it, and it's easy to be able to use your power to just insulate yourself and protect yourself and push yourself forward. And she's decided to use the star power she has to push these voices forward and push the story forward and push performers like myself forward. And we need that because there are nuances to each culture. And just because you're telling the story, you might not know the nuances to that culture. What you may read is, oh, Louis meant this. Actually, if you really look into it, he actually was saying something else. And you need someone who understands that culture to be able to interpret that for you and to say, no, this is what it is. And that's what she's been doing.
Vanessa, tell me, what does it feel like to have your producerial debut for this Broadway production?
As a result of being one of the founders of Black Theater United, and our mission is diversity and inclusion on all levels of commercial theater, this was a prime opportunity for me to become a producer on this musical.
'Cause when you're smiling, keep on smiling. The whole world smiles. The whole world smiles. The whole world smiles with.
I think as an African-American person, seeing Louis Armstrong in his life, it is important for me as a producer to make sure that the storytelling is accurate, has integrity, and I have been in certain discussions with my all-white production team about some historical facts that need to be there or aren't true and need to be omitted. And that I feel that's my part as an African American, to be in the room and to show up and share my voice.
And we have opening night here in Chicago. How are we feeling?
I'm having the best time. I mean, to come to the city that actually made Louis Louis. You know, he got here and he was really, really green. Like, everybody knew he was an incredible trumpet player. That wasn't the issue. But to become the entertainer that he needed to become, he had to come to Chicago first. And with the help of King Joe Oliver and definitely the help of his second wife, Lil Hardin, she is the one that molded him into the Louis that we all know. She's the one that looked at him and said, hey, you are somebody and you can be somebody. Let me show you how. And let me show you how to do it the Chicago way. You know, he was 17 when he got married the first time. The second time
She was a prostitute.
Right.
His mother was a prostitute.
Yes.
So he grew up in the Storyville, which is the area. So he grew up in a rough neighborhood.
Yeah. That's the thing.
But it gave him his cred.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. When people see Louis Armstrong, they see Hollywood Louis. They don't realize that Hollywood Louis is just a piece. He's more jazz Louis. Jazz Louis is more like what we would consider our hip hop brothers today. He was very hood and he knew it and he understood.
So this is kind of like the untold story.
Yes, this is the untold story of Louis Armstrong. There's what Hollywood white America wanted Louis Armstrong to be, and then there's who he truly is. And we are showing who he truly was. And not only was he not only did he change American music, not only did he change the perception of African Americans for white people at that time, but he was still, you know, navigating being a black man at that time and dealing with his own struggles. And we showed that part, so you could see he wasn't just the smiling trumpet player that, you know, said, "Oh yeah," in people's faces. There was a real brother there who was going through some things, and these 4 women went through it with him. They were right there in the trenches with him. And it took him getting older to realize, now I've got it right.
A Wonderful World began its pre-Broadway debut in New Orleans before heading to Chicago, where you can now see it at the Cadillac Palace Theater through October 29th. We've got more tidbits from that interview on our website. And that's our show tonight. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. Immigration advocates call on the Biden administration to extend work permits for longtime undocumented residents. And a local museum looks to take over a vacant fire station in Little Village. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm whose attorneys embrace a culture of philanthropy and service by volunteering their time, expertise, and guidance to help others in the greater Chicago community.
The PBS NewsHour has a rich legacy.
People turn to us because they can hear from trusted sources of information and news.
That won't change a bit, even as the faces behind the desk change. Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Navaz.
Weeknights at 6 on WTTW.
It was a phenomenal thing to see.
That is absolutely unbelievable.
The gasps and the awe.